You're either Nexus or you're against us. That was the mantra repeated by the rogues that raged against the Stamford machine. Based on the early response to Wade Barrett's circling of the prospect wagons, it appeared that the Nexus, with its wholesale ransacking and relentless onslaught, could inject the very same unpredictable chaos that the NWO brought to WCW a decade and a half earlier. Real excitement persisted through Barrett's call to arms as he and a band of fresh faces commandeered WWE Raw on a weekly basis. But just as quickly as the wave of anarchy crashed over the WWE landscape, it ebbed out to sea, never again regaining its exciting ferocity. I'm Jack from Cultaholic.com, and this is Remembering the Nexus. Nearly a full decade has passed since the advent of NXT, in a much different form than that we know today. In its first incarnation, NXT was something of a reality-based game show, in which 8 developmental hopefuls vied for a spot on WWE's main roster, as well as a WWE Championship match. You had Justin Gabriel, the risk taker, Skip Sheffield, the insatiably hungry cowboy, Darren Young, the cheerful partier, David Otunga, the bad boy with mainstream connections, Daniel Bryan, the established indie veteran, Heath Slater, the happy good old boy, Michael Tarver, the skillful fighter, and Wade Barrett, the towering brawler. Flanked by the jolliest TV show theme song this side of any 1980s family sitcom, this octet was ready for action. This attempted marriage of game show to episodic wrestling produced a few peculiar moments, mostly in the form of physical challenges that the prospects had to carry out when they weren't wrestling in, actual matches. And speaking of matches, it seemed pretty strange that Bryan, a renowned former Ring of Honor World Champion who gained a cult following for his world-class in-ring ability, failed to win a single match on the show before dropping out in the first wave of eliminations. Some felt that this was a burial on the part of a supposedly spiteful WWE, while one could argue that WWE knew Bryan's popularity was unassailable and wanted to simply use him to build the others up. The finals of the series took place on June 1st, 2010, after 17 weeks of trying to establish 8 wrestlers who were, for all intents and purposes, unmolded slabs of clay in tights and boots, apart from, maybe Daniel Bryan. In the end, it was Barrett who stood tall over the fray, beating out Otunga and Gabriel. Aside from the proven talent that was Bryan, Barrett seemed to have all the necessary tools. A looming frame, a natural smirk, confident promo ability, the sort of well-honed character traits that a dangerous and smug villain requires to hold his own against a litany of babyfaces. Barrett was bound to make an impact, but he wouldn't do so alone. 6 nights later on Raw, without any forewarning, Barrett watched as his 7 show rivals jumped the barricades, attacking John Cena, CM Punk, and all of the ringsiders, except for a fleeing Michael Cole. They also destroyed the ring to really punctuate this violent intrusion. The group sported matching armbands that bore the letter N, which came to stand, obviously, for Nexus. The complete lack of foreshadowing prior to this ambitious bit of television startled the audience, both at home and in the arena. WWE simply didn't do storylines like this anymore, especially in the very safe PG era. The Nexus felt very dangerous with a pronounced sharpness to its bite. Not only did WWE suddenly elevate 8 relatively new wrestlers into the main event tier in one fell swoop, but they spurred all sorts of questions. Why did this group come together? Would anybody else join this band of rebels? Was Michael Cole, who went unscathed during the Nexus's original gate crash, in on it with the group? Who would their next target be? And the most important question of all was the root of all those curiosities. What on earth was going to happen next? The 2 Raws that followed the night of the formation sparked the highest ratings since WrestleMania season, and the intrigue was real. Of course, there had to be a hang-up or 2 in the offing. Daniel Bryan, the Nexus member with the most established wrestling pedigree, was fired days after the angle. Bryan felt he was following orders when he and the others were told by Vince McMahon and Michael Hayes to orchestrate a gang-style beatdown on Cena and co. Amid the wild scene, Bryan strangled ring announcer Justin Roberts with his necktie and spit on Cena. He was lightly reprimanded afterwards for the act, so it was a bit of a surprise when Vince called him personally on the Friday afterwards to fire him. Likely due to pressure or potential pressure from sponsors and groups who lean on WWE being a kid-friendly show, the American Dragon fell on the sword. Bryan's exit was explained away in kayfabe as him showing remorse for his part in the attack, as Barrett didn't want squeamish soldiers in his army. With Bryan written out, the beatings only continued to the improved morale of an intrigued audience. Arn Anderson, Ricky Steamboat, and then GM Bret Hart, and even Vince McMahon himself, fell victim to a remorseless numbers game at the hands of the iconoclastic insurgents. There seemed to be no antidote to the Nexus's fury, as feuding WWE incumbents couldn't get on the same page long enough to provide counter-resistance. SummerSlam would be the battleground for WWE versus the Nexus, with a very unexpected result. The now 7-man version of the Nexus battled a Cena winner squadron that included Chris Jericho, Edge, Bret Hart, R-Truth, John Morrison, and a surprise in the return of Bryan, now aligned against his literally one-time brothers in arms. In this elimination match, the Nexus built up a persistent advantage throughout much of the battle, bringing it down to Cena against Barrett and Gabriel. Despite taking a DDT onto the exposed concrete floor, Cena hit the Juvenation machine just in time to pin Gabriel after a missed 450 splash, and then tap out the almighty Barrett to the STF seconds later, giving Cena the big victory over the powerful Rebellion. In the aftermath, armchair fans and critics were very confused, but their cynicism prevented them from being all that shocked. Super Cena conquered the team that, with a decisive enough win, could have been made men, and added necessary freshness to the company as a whole. So why on earth did Cena win? Well, as Jericho and Edge have since revealed, it was Vince who made the call for Cena to survive. Gabriel claimed that the Nexus was originally supposed to win the match, with Barrett surviving, but Cena had the finish changed so that he himself stood tall. Jericho also claimed that Cena suggested coming back strong after the concrete DDT spot, which Jericho disagreed with. He felt that if Cena were to survive, he needed to do it by the skin of his teeth. Instead, it was same old, Cena conquers all, copyright 2010, WWE, all rights reserved. One couldn't help but notice how when the New World Order ran roughshod over WCW, they racked up every conceivable victory in order to make things look bleak for the good guys. But here, in just 2 months, Cena had willed himself past the opposition, forgetting that his head had even bonked the concrete floor as he flashed his victorious smile. In the weeks ahead, as Darren Young was written out and Skip Sheffield injured his ankle, the group whittled down both in quantity and also in aura. Suddenly, the Nexus didn't seem like such a threatening plague to WWE after all. But WWE pressed on with the group and even gave Barrett a win over Cena at Hell in a Cell, following interference from eventual members Michael McGillicuddy and Husky Harris. This fiendish setup forced Cena to join the Nexus against his will, which was undercut by 1. Him still wearing his usual every skittle in the bag coloured t-shirts and hats, and 2. Him actively undermining the group, as though he were the same powerful Cena that just so happened to lose to fearless leader Barrett on some kind of fluke. Cena even refused to help Barrett defeat Randy Orton to become WWE champion, a choice that ultimately got him kayfabe fired from WWE at Survivor Series. During the interim 7-week period, Cena was winning tag belts without trying, nominally the same Cena, but just wearing an armband that he didn't much care for. For the Nexus, driving Cena out of the company, even at the expense of Barrett being unable to win WWE's top belt, should have been a monumental result. They had slayed the face of the company, who chose joblessness after he was unable to compromise his integrity in the face of aiding Barrett's cause. Sure, world champion Barrett turning away challenges with the help of his dutiful henchmen seemed to be the ideal beaten path, but pulling down the Cena statue in the town square was hardly a hollow win. It would have been quite a coup for the Nexus had Cena, actually gone away. But Cena didn't go away, not even for a bloody week. Instead, he randomly showed up on episodes of Raw, technically as a trespasser, to play divide and conquer with the group's remaining members in their vulnerable moments. Sure, Barrett was still something of a top guy, and Slater and Gabriel were pushed with a bit of oomph as tag team champions, but they were still knock-around guys to Cena, who remained part of Raw on a weekly basis. His so-called firing lasted 3 weeks, with Barrett getting him rehired after his underlings became sick of the random attacks. So yes, the powerful group that once laid waste to an entire ringside area, occupants included, were now whining because an individual was beating them up. So much for strength in numbers. The Barrett era of the Nexus came to an end at the TLC pay-per-view, little more than 6 months after it began. Cena withstood the so-called Barrett barrage in a chairs match, dropping the Revolution leader with an attitude adjustment onto a couple of rows of chairs to win. After the match up on the entrance stage, Cena dropped a ton of chairs that were part of the scenery onto Barrett, the equivalent basically of Bugs Bunny dropping a piano onto one of his many antagonists, minus of course the comical sound effects, but they might as well have been in there. For all intents and purposes, Cena had thwarted the group that had come in like bloodthirsty lions and in just half a year exited like docile lambs. Despite the damage done to one of the hottest angles in quite some time, and much of the damage was consciously inflicted, WWE still saw value in the Nexus name and appointed a brand new leader for the group, CM Punk. Freshly returned from a hip injury, Punk at first attempted to bring the cultishness of the now defunct straight edge society over to his version of the Nexus. He forced his lingering lackeys to make physical sacrifices to prove their loyalty. Slater and Gabriel refused and deserted the new boss, while McGillicuddy Moriarty, Harris, and Otunga all stayed, with the group soon after welcoming considerable muscle in the form of Welsh strongman Mason Ryan. Briefly, Punk's Nexus battled with Barrett's new group The Core, which included Slater, Gabriel, and Ezekiel Jackson, but both heel factions moved on to other endeavors before too long. The Nexus, after each getting eliminated by Cena in the 2011 Royal Rumble despite a massive numbers advantage, focused instead on Randy Orton, due to Punk's long backburnered resentment towards the Viper for costing him a world title way back in 2008. One by one, Orton picked the Nexus subordinates off with huge punt kicks before defeating Punk at WrestleMania 27. In that run-up, Harris disappeared altogether from WWE television, leaving the group with just 4 men now and very little pulse. Otunga and McGillicuddy captured the tag team belts from Big Show and Kane that May, but the group was still firmly entrenched in the mid-card. 4 then became 3 when Mason Ryan was quietly written out with an apparent injury at the end of June. Just after his exit, Punk then separated himself from the tag champs when he stood alone as a rabble-rousing belligerent, railing against Cena and the WWE Machine through his oft-cited pipe bomb promo. While this did seem to be in line with the Nexus's original ideals, Punk was definitely going it alone against the corporate Leviathan. And though the Nexus iconography stuck with him for a little while, he was clearly over the group by the time the summer of Punk truly rolled around. A year earlier, a Nexus member winning the grand prize would have been a landmark moment, but here at Money in the Bank 2011, Punk celebrated alone. Well, alone if you don't count the jubilant Chicago faithful. Punk's focus on beating the system with a defiant smile put all the spotlight on him, just him, making him the talk of the wrestling industry. But at the same time, most had forgotten that McGillicuddy and Otunga were even tag team champions, and they were afterthoughts by the time they dropped the gold to Kofi Kingston and Evan Bourne shortly after that year's SummerSlam. The team split up after that, with Otunga the only man to serve in the Nexus for all 14 months of its lifespan. The body had long been lifeless, but in August 2011, the plug was finally pulled. Ironic that for such a forcible impact made on their arrival, that the demise of the Nexus was met with disinterest and a faint cough. Fans might sometimes love to play what could have been, but the Nexus truly is for the 2010s what the Invasion was for the 2000s, a wasted opportunity that is still lamented to this day by those that it initially captivated. New stars definitely did emerge from the group, but in somewhat roundabout ways, more known for their solo exploits than any sustained group destruction. There were many who were with the Nexus, only to learn that fates and plans beyond their control were against it. Thanks very much for watching, and let us know what you think in the comments section down below. You can follow Cultaholic on Twitter at Cultaholic and on Facebook at facebook.com/Cultaholic. If you enjoy what we do, then please do check out our Patreon, patreon.com/Cultaholic, where you can pledge. And don't forget, of course, most importantly of all, to hit subscribe and to join us.